Let's get analysis with Paul Frimpong from Ghana's capital, Accra. He's the Executive Director of the Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory. Paul, thank you so much for speaking to us. You know, for decades, China's been this major player in Africa in so many countries, but it's also faced criticism, as we heard there from Grace in her report. Some accusing Beijing of being a new colonizing power. Is that a fair criticism?
I think perhaps there are a lot of issues raised on the Africa-China relations, and the most pervasive of them all is the conversation around China being a new colonialist in Africa. Obviously, everyone can witness the fact that for almost 2 decades and above, the ties between Africa and China has been deepening, especially since the inception of the Forum China-Africa Cooperation. And when someone says that due to this deepening tie between Africa and China, therefore China is playing as a new colonialist in Africa, I believe that is not true. And of course, you look at the history of China, China has never been a colonial power before. In fact, China is never colonized. Again, the current structure, political setting and terrain in Africa does not even allow any such practice to even happen. And when you say China is a new colonialist, it also means that you're actually moving away Africa's agency in the engagement with China. Therefore, you are literally saying that Africans do not have a say in the engagement with China, and therefore Beijing decides and interfere in African political affairs. And when you look at China's even foreign policy, non-political interference is a core part of China's own foreign policy. So you can track and see that China's interest in Africa is purely based on economic interest, and of course, partnership for cooperation, win-win cooperation, as has been seen. So there's no iota of truth in the fact that China is in Africa and engaging in new colonialism.
Paul, at the same time, China has today said that it will start focusing on selling more technology to Africa instead of funding things like they have in the past with regards to infrastructure. Or rather, are these kinds of investments also indicative of Beijing's own economic downturn at the moment?
I mean, it's quite surprising to even read that, during President Xi's speech some few hours ago, where he mentioned about almost $50 billion in financing options available, because when you look at China's own economic development in recent times, one would have assumed that this forecast in terms of financial commitment would have followed the same as happened in the Dhaka forecast. But as we can see, this has been an unexpected announcement in terms of the amount involved in the financial commitment. That shows that indeed China, of course, understand that internally they are facing their own economic challenges, overcapacity-related issues. But then, of course, they believe that the commitment that they've made towards Africa is in the interest of their own development in the medium to long term. And of course, Africa, as we've all seen, we need financing in such volumes, because as we speak now, to bridge Africa's own infrastructure financing gap, we need about $130 billion to $170 billion for the next decade and above, according to the African Development Plan. And this line of financing, of course, offers that kind of opportunity. So I believe that in as much as we all understand what China is facing, if they believe that based on their current situation, they can offer that financing line, then of course, I think it's a welcoming development for Africa to continue the path of building real critical infrastructure that we believe can unlock the economic potential of the continent.
Part of the issue, though, is that when it comes to those financing, there are many African countries that have not been able to pay back the debt. And then also some countries in Africa are saying that they're relying too much on China and other countries. Should African nations also be looking inwards or even across the continent to help themselves?
So first of all, it's an established fact that a number of countries in Africa are facing debt-related crisis. In fact, my own country, Ghana, in the last 1 year, we had to go to the IMF for a bailout. And currently, we are under a 3-year IMF extended credit facility based on our inability to service our debt, both domestic and external. So that is a fact, as you mentioned earlier in your news bulletin from Zambia as well. But when you look at the narrative around this debt discussion on the continent, it is made as if these countries are in debt distress because of China's investment, which is not true, because the fact does not support these numbers. I'll give an example. In the case of Ghana, as of 2022, our total external debt is about $30 billion. Out of this debt, only $1.9 billion is owed to China, which is about 6%. So if you look at these numbers and you say that because of China's 6% of our debt, that's where we find ourselves in, then of course, you are not being true to the conversation happening there. I believe that Africa has the capacity to look internally. As over-reliance, of course, is never an option. To rely on just one country or one source for financing is definitely not an option. Because when something happens to that economy domestically and they pull back, then you're going to be in a fix. So we believe that there has to be a new innovative financing model in Africa for Africans to be able to put forward their best fit in order to finance their own development as well.
Paul Frimpong in Accra, good to speak to you. Thank you so much.